Chapter 11. New Believer. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, The Society of the Secret Eye. Angora's face twitched. Excuse me, but could you let me go now? The bald bandit asked with a smile. Angora turned to the genie. Bury him 100 meters beneath the ground. Be careful not to kill him too quickly. Wait. That's not what you promised. The bald bandit jumped in fright. I did say that I wouldn't kill you. I never said anything about letting you go, Angora replied calmly. And it's just burying you underground, it's your own business whether you can dig yourself out. You. Seeing red, the bald bandit rushed toward Angora with a sword in hand in a desperate struggle. However, he vanished entirely at once when the genie pointed with a finger, the air echoing with the words he could not finish. And that's all of them. Genie gave Angora a wave. I shall be taking my leave, hold on. Angora called out. What is it? I'll just put it out there that I won't be obeying further orders, the genie replied. No, I just want to know about the Overlord system. What is it, actually? Angora asked seriously. A charm. Class magic. Or some other sacred spell. Even if he was not liked in his own house, he remained the child of a duke. Unlike children like Elena who were raised in mountain villages, he had seen the world at a young age, encountering much magic and divine providence. Be that as it may, no divine feat was as unique as the Overlord system. Moreover, the youth also faintly sensed that if he did not seize the chance and learn some useful information from the genie in the lamp, he would not know what the system actually was for a long time. You are sharper than I thought. The blue-skinned genie sighed in admiration. Naturally, the genie was actually Shi Wei in disguise. Although his divine order has the ability to create life, the ability to create NPCs, to be precise, that takes considerable divine energy. Without it in excess to squander with, he simply put on a disguise and descended, becoming Angora's henchman. He had already noticed Angora's potential as a believer when he planned to place the starters outside of the Valley of the Tragic Dead. Therefore, he provided him with temporary system clearance which led to what happened just now. In the first place, Shi Wei aided Angora rather half-heartedly as well. If Angora was not sharp enough to notice the Hitman Genie or was too cautious to use it as described, he most likely would have fallen victim to the bandits. If that happened, Shi Wei would at most find it a pity for losing a candidate. He would not be disappointed, however, given that there were many entrances into the Valley of the Tragic Dead, and he had few other options beyond Angora. Still, he never imagined that Angora would succeed in securing his help while not being confused by the text in the system interface. Furthermore, when Shi Wei himself tried to return to the divine realm, he tried to ask directly about the most important question that was the system, avoiding asking nonsense. All at once, Shi Wei thought that the kid might be able to achieve considerable success with the system's aid. It is the system, a generous blessing from the god of games. Shi Wei then answered Angora as the genie. Why would he grant me a blessing? I have never prayed in his church. In fact, I never knew the god of games existed before this. Angora quickly pressed. He probably finds you gifted. Who knows? Angora shrugged. What is he like as a divine being? Even if Angora was not faithful, the god did extend a helping hand in his desperate moment. Therefore, aside from gratitude, he could not help wanting to learn more about that divine being. Never heard before. Shi Wei immediately bragged about himself. A pleasant one, wise, brave, and magnificent. Although he does not have many worshipping him at the moment, he would certainly rise above the other gods in the future. If you have the chance, you could try devoting yourself to the god of games, then. Before Angora could ask another question, Shi Wei instantly burst into a puff of bright dust and vanished from his sight. Angora made a troubled face. He stood blankly where he was, before being startled by the sound of flapping wings from the skies. There were many scavengers such as crows circling overhead. After all, many had died around him, and with the air thick with the smell of blood, soon it would not just be crows but also ferocious carnivores. Without hesitation, Angora packed all necessities from his carriage into his bag, quietly saluting the old driver up front. He would have buried him as well if not for the pressing urgency. "I'm journeying alone now." Angora quietly cheered himself up, before heading for his own domain, the small, unnamed and remote town. Meanwhile, Shi Wei watched the youth go from the divine kingdom, sensing faint divine energy from him. "Have at you." The tall and muscular Zhou charged toward a black bear, holding the best sword forged in the village. The black bear roared and lunged at him in return. But halfway through its assault, Go Dan whispered whilst aiming his broken bow, "Deft shot." An arrow stabbed into the bear's nose and staggered it from the pain, growling as it held its nose. "Frost bullet." Edward called out from behind Zhou, waving a long stick as it unleashed a white ball of snow, freezing the bear's paws and almost felling him. "Strengthen." Jessica cried, aiming her wooden cross at Zhou. "Now." Zhou then flung the sword in the ground, ran to the black bear and grabbed it by the stomach. His muscles started to bulge as he then roared, "Suplex." He then firmly lifted the bear from the ground over his head, throwing the beast headfast in the ground. NV.blood.red fonts that read, "Critical, .150" instantly leaped out over the black bear's head. Its body twitched once before going prone entirely. As it burst into shards of light, the group cheered happily. All of them were children from families of hunters and would usually be scrambling for their lives whenever they ran into a black bear. How did they defeat one so easily? The EXP on this bear is so high I leveled up. Which should I pick next, heavy shot or split shot? Wow. The mana cost for a mage is too high, just a few spells and my mana is almost used up. Arg. It was so heavy I sprained my leg. Meanwhile, Elena sat in a corner miserably. Why can't I help? One spear of victory from me and that bear would be gone. She complained unhappily. Because only you can use healing spells. Go Dan grinned apologetically. That's right. Only you can help us when we get hurt. Edward agreed. By the way, help Zhou, his ankle is swelling like a pig's. It's fine, I can go on. Zhou patted his chest confidently, but his face soon changed. Wait, sprained leg status actually lowers strength and agility. Don't move. Something like that will recover in a moment. Elena quickly healed Zhou's ankle, while not forgetting Jessica the cleric. Jessica, you should hurry up and learn healing skills as well, I don't want to stay behind and watch all the time. Understood, our dear great saintess. Jessica patted Elena's small head, beaming. As everyone happily prepared for their lunch break, they suddenly heard the sounds of a battle nearby. TSK. We should complete the oracle as soon we can, Edward said after some thought. Let's not get involved with a fight that has nothing to do with us. Ding. Side quest started. Rescue the merchant convoy. This mission has a time limit, please accomplish it as soon as possible. Edward was speechless. Chapter 12. Rescue the merchant team. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Edward accepted the mission happily even if it was a slap in the face by the system. After all, after poking around the system to familiarize himself with it, he learned that completing quests earned more experience and rewards than hunting for beasts. Still, while they had received quests such as Daily Quest, Hunt 10 Rodents or Weekly Quest, Collect 30 boar tusks, that was the first time they received such a side quest. After the group had ascertained the contents of the mission, they quickly sneaked toward the direction where the fighting was. Soon, they reached the battle, hiding behind a lush shrub to peek at the situation. The battle was occurring in a spacious clearing in the forest, the center of which were several carriages. Edward at once recognized that those were caravans of traveling merchants. There were some who had occasionally passed through Kennington village, where it would become as busy as a festive season every occasion they did so. However, the village was too poor and the villagers did not have much savings, and the traveling merchants eventually stopped visiting them due to the lack of profits. Goblins, standing over a meter tall, were surrounding them in a tight pack. Although it did not appear as if they had weapons or armor, they numbered more than 100. The hump beasts pulling the carriages had already been killed, their corpses were piled in a circle by the mercenaries around the carriages as a makeshift fort. On the other hand, the merchants and mercenaries numbered up to just a dozen. Even if their weapons were sharp and their armor solid, they could not stand against the numbers of the opposing force. Already, 2 amongst them who were nearby the perimeter created with the hump beasts could no longer fight. It appeared to be a matter of time before all was lost. What should we do? Should we help? Joe quietly asked Edward, gulping. Edward said nothing. He was chewing his fingernail, he looked rather hesitant. Both Go-Dan and Jessica appeared doubtful as well. That was the first time they encountered such a dangerous situation. More worryingly, those goblins were too many, they just might be killed along if they helped. They were now players, and Shiwei did mention that they would be revived with sufficient experience. However, they had yet to overcome their old mindset, not to mention that none of them really died after leaving Kennington village despite the many scrapes and bruises they had sustained. On the other hand, Elena appeared unconcerned. Being a saintess, her faith was absolutely stronger than the other 4. If you guys are afraid, let me divert their attention, she said eagerly. I think I could take 10 of them. But there are more than 100 of them, Go-Dan shot back. By the ancestors, you're the one amongst us who can cast revive. According to his lordship, we have to wait 3 days before we could resurrect if you die in battle, and minus 20% EXP, Jessica added. But I'm really bored with hiding behind everyone every time. Elena grumbled unhappily. Edward turned towards Joe with a look that said please help me convince her. Joe nodded in understanding, and then proceeded to scream, WRYYYYYYY, as he dashed out of the shrub and bounded toward the goblins. Everyone in the fight, goblin or merchant, turned at once toward them. That idiot. Quickly dropping his conversation with Elena, Edward picked up his arcane staff and gave chase, unsure if he should laugh or cry. Meanwhile, Go-Dan had moved swiftly and fired an arrow at one of the goblins which was trying to ambush them, whereas Jessica buffed Joe with strengthen. We're the Silver Chime, thanks for your help. A middle-aged man who was dressed as a merchant shouted at them, but just a moment later, he added puzzledly, where's the rest of the reinforcements? Are there any adults? We're it, Edward replied after launching a frost bullet to freeze 2 goblins. Just the 5 of us. The man who appeared delighted reverted to his despondent look before. 5 brats who had yet to grow pubes. Under such a force of goblins, it was literally trying to douse a burning cart of firewood with a cup of water. Not even a bubble would surface. Nonetheless, his face changed again in no time at all. Those 5 unusual brats were surprisingly formidable. Although the huge brat essentially lumbered around, was slow to react and did not look the part of a warrior at all, each swing of his blade would send a goblin into the air. In fact, whether that particular goblin was charging at him or flailing his own wooden club, it made no difference as all of them would be blown away. Unusually, while other swordsmen would have pursued their target and stabbed the goblin in the vitals to kill, he was different. After sending each goblin flying, he would instead grab it for a suplex. Although his might was devastating, something was amiss. The mage brat who looked like the group's leader was even more superior. After having met the old mages of grand cities, the middle-aged man had seen them use their magic up close. However, all of them had to chant or prepare certain arcane materials before they could unleash their spells, with even the more powerful ones needing to make signs to do the same. Even if he was only essentially switching between two skills. Fireballs and snowballs, he did not have to prepare before casting his spells directly. After all, if it had been any other mage, you would hear them chant, "Fairies of the wind, heed my call. Fuse, morph, set. Bless thee with the name of frost and freeze thine foes in blood and bone thus to bring the deadly cold to the land." On the other hand, all that Mage Brat murmured was, "Frost bullet." That was what it felt like. Not to mention that the power of his magic was not decreasing even after casting for an extended time. Utterly mind-blowing. Chapter 13. Level Up. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Marnie Wilf was regretting everything terribly. As a traveling merchant affiliated to the Silver Chimes, he had chosen the more dangerous route by crossing the Dray Forest in order to shorten the period for moving his goods. After all, there never had been dangerous magical beasts around these parts. And even if there were goblins sighted recently, they posed no threat, not to mention that the Dray Forests was quite vast. He did not believe that he would be so unlucky as to run into an entire tribe. But he did. In fact, their convoy ran headlong into one that was migrating due to food running out. In their hunger, they fought well above and beyond their usual ability. Aside from the dead hump beasts, several elite mercenaries were wounded as well. Thank the goddess of prosperity for taking pity on them right then. Just as they were all about to die, 5 village kids popped out of nowhere, and with their mysterious abilities that could have been divine providence or magical power, they managed to slow the goblins' attack. Be that as it may, as the initial confusion that had been their advantage faded, they were now entire tightly within the quagmire of the goblins' swarming tactics. The warrior whom Marnie had thought to be an adult was now immobile, held beneath the weight of an entire pile of goblins. The archer brat was forced to run as more goblins approached, occasionally turning for a sliding tackle to bring some of them to the ground before continuing running. Meanwhile, the girl who looked older was no longer casting buffs for the others but was guarding a younger girl, knocking back any approaching goblin with her massive cross that was larger than herself. The younger girl herself was casting sacred healing spells. Even if Marnie could not tell whether her ability belonged to the god of life's temple or the brilliant white church, her help was the reason those children could endure until now. Their leader, Edward, was now no longer casting spells like before. Instead, he was scrambling away, only unleashing his magic between long periods while mumbling things like, "My blue bar is empty, move it, Joe. Why aren't you moving, or milk go Dan, Elena, he's almost finished." In the end, he was cornered by 4 goblins, and stabbed in the stomach with a rusted sword. Even if the boy did beat the one in front of him to the ground, pulled the sword out and stabbed it to death in return, it did not look like he was going to make it. Everything seemed finished right then. Although he felt bad about it, it appears the children would be killed by the goblins as well. Marnie started to think about what he should do, encourage the mercenaries and have them fight to the death, or look for a chance to run. Nonetheless, that was when he suddenly noticed that the mage brat was smiling unusually. "Wow! Goblin XP is so high, I leveled up." With those words which made no sense at all, the boy who had been left ragged after being chased began to start unleashing a flurry of spells once more. The goblins, having secured the advantage and hence threw caution to the wind, was blasted into the dirt. He looked so lively and energetic, completely different from that disappointment when stabbed. Soon, Marnie also saw through the young mage's torn clothes that there was no wound beneath. That was not right. He had clearly seen the boy having a rusted sword of iron pushed into his stomach, along with the sight of skin splitting and blood gushing. In fact, the bloodstains were still there. So how did the wound disappear? Where had the gaping wound gone? Still, even more curiosities that went beyond Marnie's common sense were occurring. The young warrior who had almost been crushed into a pile of flesh underneath the goblins, but kept alive by the healing spells cast by a younger girl with silver-haired and twin ponytails, had also suddenly burst out. Every goblin which had been mysteriously blasted away, just as every bruise on his body vanished. He was no longer heaving for air like he did in that fierce battle a while ago, and instead looked spirited as if he did not actually use up any energy. Really? I leveled up too. He was looking distractedly into the air in front of himself with delight, before simply picking up one of the goblin's weapons and crying out, "It's mad, even this goblin club has higher attack stats than the best sword from our village." Then, he rushed towards the dazed goblins. Even his sword skills seemed to have improved now compared to his previous limited ability of powerful swings and suplexes. Now, he seemed to have learned a double lunging stab, which not only deals twice the damage on the goblins but also knocks them back by a certain distance. Still, it appeared that he had yet to adjust it to the skill and had to run in order to use it, and he could now be seen leading a pack of goblins that were running backward. Aside from those two, the young archer seemed to have strengthened as well. Having been fleeing all over the place, he was now still fleeing all over the place, although he was a lot less ragged than before, not to mention that he would often turn around and fire several high-speed chain shots that would kill one goblin each time. And what the hell? How many arrows did that guy have? As Marnie quietly counted the youth's usage of arrows, he could not help but be perplexed by where his arrows were coming from. "I actually leveled up too," the older girl said softly in surprise as she stopped flailing her cross. "Is killing goblins is such a profit? Great. Jessica, you must click gradual heal. That way, I'll be free." The younger girl she was protecting cheered happily before bounding toward the goblins while ignoring the others' attempts to stop her. It was a reckless move which certainly left Marnie frowning as his danger alarm went off. The reason those children could endure until now was thanks to the younger girl's continuous casting of healing spells, and it was not only their own party, but his own mercenaries were also being helped. Indeed, half of them would have gone down if not for her healing. But now, she was running with a strut towards the goblins, essentially asking for a beating. Unable to stand and watch, Marnie tried to order the mercenaries to protect her, or at least stop her from getting killed. That was also the moment when he witnessed the most shocking scene. Air itself seemed to have become still as endless golden radiance gathered in the girl's palm. The entire world seemed to lose color save for the girl and the light in her hand, and even the goblin's movement seemed to have slowed countless times. Then, in the very next moment, the surging holy power that left even onlookers staggered condensed in her hand into a bright and massive spear. Even if it was merely a form blessed by streaming radiance, the spear was noble and elegant, a pure beauty that no one could avert their eyes from. In an instant, the spear was unleashed. Rushing forth with a force as if it would pierce heaven and earth, it penetrated every goblin before the girl and pinned them on the ground. Chapter 14. Our main character is spying at the moment you are listening at NovelFull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Oh, they're doing quite well. In the Divine Kingdom, Shi Wei was using his divine eye to spy on what was happening with his own followers in the mortal realm. He could not help feeling glad that they were unleashing their wrath upon the goblin pack despite their average level being less than 5. Then, when Alina's party cleared away the goblins attacking the merchant convoy, Shi Wei judged that their quest was accomplished and generously rewarded them with a lot of XP. He then turned the orb to see the corpses of goblins killed by the 5 children. Everything killed by his believers, or players, would all be delivered as sacrifices to Shi Wei, and those goblins with a single thought, those goblins were then disintegrated into the purest of divine energy that replenished Shi Wei's divinity. From the formula he determined at the start, his divine energy was now approximately 78 points. Even if that many points were used to strengthen and repair his divinity did not resolve the fact that it was still unstable, the instant effect was distinct. It's quick and convenient by obtaining offerings from believers, but it is also slightly troublesome. There were some objects resembling metal scraps beside the piles of goblin corpses, stacking considerably in size, the residual crumbs left after the pure essence in the goblins were extracted as divine energy. It was precisely why, even if the offering could rapidly secure divine energy, and why most divine beings except some minor evil gods were especially demanding toward their own followers for such tributes. Given that objects which could be completely converted into divine energy did not exist in other planes, everything here would leave piles of useless scraps after deities were done extracting divine energy. That was why other gods would only request that their offerings be limited to objects of condensed energies such as the illuminating crystals, leaving someone undiscriminating like Shi Wei who would gather even goblin corpses an exception. After all, those crumbs would be no different from kitchen refuse or fecal matter when they accumulate in the divine kingdom, and too much of a hassle to be dealt with. Truth be told, Shi Wei was himself having a headache at how he should handle them. He was unlike other gods because he has the power to move through world barriers. He could simply look for a place to throw them after bringing them with him whenever he entered the prime material plane. Still, it would not be a problem at first. It is a different matter as time goes by, because the offerings are drawn using divine energy. In other words, those crumbs would be dyed with the scent of his own divine amidst the extraction process. Therefore, if he simply threw them anywhere, he might get caught by other divine beings. And that would only mean trouble. His ability to move freely through different worlds despite the plane barrier that the Trinity of creation was too alluring for other gods. If word of that goes out and when other divine beings with ulterior motives reached his own divine kingdom, his divinity would be stolen effortlessly considering that he was essentially a candle in the wind. Furthermore, the crumbs were useless even as a divine object gifted to followers by their gods. Its attribute was metallic, but was neither hard nor as resilient as steel, nor was it comparable to ordinary crude iron as material for forging weapons. It assuredly had no effect save for the fact that the divine scent that latched onto it is hard to fake. Hold on, I think I have an idea. Shi Wei felt his brain, but there is no actual brain in his divine form, getting an idea albeit obscurely. However, he could not hold on to it. Well, it's fine. The place here is still huge, I could just let it pile for a while. Compared to that, it's better to think about how I should spend my divine energy. At first, Shi Wei planned to invest any divine energy into stabilizing his divinity once he earned it, since he was uncomfortable with it fluctuating and feeling so hollow. Nonetheless, he gave up on that after he did earn them and following some serious consideration. Although his divinity was definitely unstable at the moment, it was still a stretch to call it being on the edge of destruction. As long as those children did not renounce him, the god of games, he did not have to worry about vanishing for the time being. There were certain pressing problems in comparison. After becoming a ball of light, a divine being, to be precise, Shi Wei realized that the bandwidth his mind was a notch broader than a human's. That did not mean that a god was considerably smarter than mortals, but that they were proficient in wide-range multitasking with their heads. That was the same for Shi Wei. At first a mortal, he realized he could now stare blankly into space within his divine kingdom while missing the takeaway food before he transmigrated, watching over Alina's party and also his other new believer Angora who was trekking alone to the small town outside of the Valley of the Tragic Dead. It left him having an illusion of being omnipotent and omniscient, although he recently found that his bandwidth was lacking after establishing his system settings. The various data and processing had taken up his mental capacity considerably. That was the moment when he remembered his fear under the rule of the textbook titled, 5 Years of College Entrance Examination and Trial Papers for Third Years, as a third-year high schooler, and his humiliation of being forced to take remedial classes. Realizing that he could not continue like that, Shi Wei decided that the divine energy he earned would be investing it into his mind, freeing himself from the heavy load of uncomplicated brainwork. At first, he thought about creating some artificial intelligence similar to Moss or J.V.I.S. to handle most of his work, but after having been baptized with science fiction for years, he felt that such a reckless move was asking for it. After all, he might really be kicking a hornet's nest if he created an Ultron. As such, after pondering for some time, he decided to make a computer with basic functions that would manage data as the players earned experience and learned new skills. That was where the mysterious energy that was divine power comes in. It was a secondary strength derived through divine energy and could only be utilized by divinity. At the same time, the different divinities of different gods would decide what the divine power they could energize would accomplish. And yet, after Shi Wei had transmigrated, Shi Wei's divinity as the god of games was developed through his own knowledge back on Earth, and presently included most domains of divine order. As such, should he gather enough divine energy, his divinity would be the same as the Dragon Balls where it accomplished every wish, although it would be weakened depending on the divine order proportions. An example would be like after Shi Wei requested a Sunway Tehulite, but after receiving his command insufficient divine energy, his divinity was left stagnated for half a day, and eventually giving him a broken computer running on Win98. Chapter 15. The Tragic Dead. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Alina's Spear of Victory completely vaporized what courage the goblins themselves had left. Having less than half of their initial numbers remaining, they were no longer as vicious as they had been, and were in fact throwing away their armor as they fled. Marnie Wilf breathed a sigh in relief from the salvation of his merchant convoy, while also feeling curious which church the 5 youth were affiliated with. They were dressed like children from some remote village, and in that case, it was impossible for them to learn divine spells given that the most inferior of such skills requires extended training in sanctified grounds, i.e. various churches, shrines or temples, hosting various deities. Moreover, the level.up thingamajig which they mentioned was a complete mystery as well. Even in the brilliant white church, was there not just a handful of bishops who could instantly restore all wounds and energy? He was even more shocked that while those youths appeared naive and ignorant of the various aspects of life, they were actually watertight and never exposed a single hint of useful information. They concealed the leveling.up divine spell considerably that, despite his eyes which had been trained as he traveled through and witnessed the various facets of the empire, he could not determine which of them actually cast that spell. Mr. Wilf. One of the mercenary escorts he hired approached while he was fussing over the mystery that was Alina's party. There's something wrong. What is it? Marnie was immediately on his toes. Did those brats do something? Could they actually be kin of some evil god, intending to wipe them out believing that they would compromise them? No. They are still huddled together, discussing some nonsense like rich rewards or skill tree, the escort replied, shaking his head. What I wanted to tell you is that the corpses of goblins they killed had all disappeared when our men started the cleanup on the battlefield. What? Marnie turned towards Alina and the others to find that there were assuredly no goblin corpses around them, although scraps such as those creatures' teeth, claws, or loincloths were strewn over the ground messily. Marnie frowned. While goblin corpses were not worth a dime and they had no intention of carrying it with them, it was too bizarre to have them all vanish. Couple that with those youths' unusual behavior, he decided he had smelled something fishy about it all. Nonetheless, while Marnie the merchant was left utterly confused, Alina and the others had received a new quest. Ding! ENV side quest started. Preach to the merchants. The god of game has prepared the starter village, a utopia for his believers in the mortal realm. However, the start of all things is the most difficult part, as the village would have trouble developing without the help of merchants directing external logistics. Heed God's will. Spread his word to the merchant convoy you have rescued and at least convert one merchant as a fellow believer of the god of games. Quest rewards. Shop blueprint, quest item, EXP, amount dependent on task completion rate, Ring of Gospel, Elite, note. Quest completion unlocks mission chain, the Lord's light illuminates the land. Excuse me, sir. Marnie then found Edward eagerly approaching himself with the look of someone finding gold. Do you have a moment to talk about our Lord and Savior, the God of games? Marnie was speechless. Finally. When Alina's party were trying their best to evangelize about the god of games as if they were promoting Amway, Angora had also reached his fief, the unnamed town outside the Valley of the Tragic Dead. The place appeared sinister and run down. If Angora had never obtained the system, he would have been so scared by its mere sight that he would abandon it at once and flee home even if he had the old driver with him. But he was now completely different. He was even finding an unimaginable affection and sense of belonging to the broken town. So, this is my fief. Foreigner, what is your business here? Angora turned towards the voice to find a withered old man standing with a crutch several feet away from him. His face was so misshapenly skinny that he appeared no different from a skeleton. However, his eyes were so sharp that Angora felt a pain as if he was being pierced by blades under his stare. My name is Angora Faust. I'm the new lord here. Angora declared, drawing out the decree from his bag. From this day forth, this town and the surrounding lands are my domain. The old man gave Angora a long, hard look, and it was until Angora felt a tingle in his scalp that he shook his head. As you could see for yourself, these lands are incomparably barren. Everyone living here are so poor that they could not afford to eat. In fact, they are biting off tree barks to satiate their hunger. You are not going to earn even a copper here. Angora knew that the old man was trying to warn him, just as he knew that coming alone to take control over the fief was considerably dangerous. His subjects could make him appear as if he had an accident on the way there, which was why most lords would tend to bring along escorts when they did the same. I would not oppress my subjects, he said, persuasively calming the other. You've misunderstood me, kid, the old man replied, shaking his head again. The royal army had ignited the forests just outside the Valley of the Tragic Dead to stop the revenants from advancing. That fire spread and reached these parts, torching half a year's worth of harvest into ash. If the famine problem could not be solved, you, a lord acknowledged by his grace, would be a target whom everyone here would vent their wrath upon. Did the royal army not reimburse the damages? Angora asked in surprise. Certainly not, kid. The old man said slowly. Who did you think that the Tragic Dead, in the name Valley of the Tragic Dead, refers to? The corpses of those creatures that had long since arisen as revenants. Certainly not. The old man then pointed at his own chest and said bitterly, it is us. The common folk who die because of the battle between the military and the revenants are the real, tragic dead. Angora was left gaping by the old man's words. Although he was prepared for difficult days ahead as he took the reins over his new domain, he did not imagine that the reality was much more brutal than what he could expect. Being a normal human who was not learned in magic, combat, or divine spells, how would he survive in this stricken place? That was when he remembered that wondrous existence which had saved his life. The Overlord System. Chapter 16. Activation Command. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The old man mistook Angora's silence as his understanding that the fiefdom was not worth a dime, and hence ceased his attempt to make things more difficult for the new lord. Seeing that Angora was actually quite young, he kindly said, it's late now. You could stay at my place if you don't mind, you should leave first thing next morning. Angora, who had been trying to summon the system by straightening his neck, was left dumbstruck in return. Where is the former lord's residence? The last lord returned to his own home immediately after just a look at this place. He didn't build anything like a manor, the old man replied. Very well. Angora sighed, surprised by how irresponsible his predecessor was. Apologies for the trouble. It was on the way to the old man's house when Angora learned that the old man was the mayor of the unnamed town, and that it was the years of revenant attacks as well as war that reduced the small but relatively thriving into its present state. There were quite a number of houses, but most of them were left run down following years of zero maintenance and vacancy. The roof tiles were falling off from time to time, with foxes or rats scrambling from the weed growing underneath. It was already commendable to have a single resident in 1 out of 3 houses. In fact, there were only 20.9 citizens including the old man who essentially had half his feet in his grave. The others were mostly elderly, women, or children. The young and able would either flee within the borders of the empire when they still had their strength, or conscripted by the royal army. Either way, they were unlikely to return. In spite of being mayor, the old man's house was actually no different from the other residents save the fact that its roof was mostly intact, and those inside did not have to sleep bathed in starlight. "Grandpa, you're back." A girl who looked just a little older than Angora himself dashed outside the house, and her gaze soon fell upon Angora, who was following the old man. "Who is he?" "Vela, he is the new lord of the town." "Mind your manners," the old man said seriously. Both the girl and Angora sized up each other, and from Angora's perspective, if his own sister could be rated 8 in terms of looks, the girl called Vela would be around 5 to 6. There were novels about knights where an incomparably beautiful peasant girl character appeared, but there was little probability of that actually happening in reality. After all, both genders were hard at work when it comes to the peasantry, the wear and tear from excessive labor and rough weather turning even the better-looking ladies unrefined. On that note, there were many nobles across the empire returning the authority of prima nocta, but rarely any would flaunt that power just to bed some dirty, ugly peasant girl. Instead, save for the random few aberrations born from incestuous unions, the nobles would always take beautiful women for wives for generations to improve their bloodlines. Therefore, most nobility had prim looks even if they did not stand above the crowd. Therefore, even if Vela did not particularly catch Angora's magical eye, a 5 to 6 peasant girl was not too bad either. "I'm Angora Faust, but you can call me Lord Angora." He introduced himself. Having been raised amongst nobility, he did not believe that there was anything wrong with having peasants addressing him as Lord. "For dinner, I still have some black bread." "Vela, go fetch it," the old man told the young girl once they entered the house. "But we don't have much food, Grandpa." The young girl appeared hesitant. "It's fine. Lord Angora is our liege, we must show our respect and kindness," the old man firmly said. Certain that she could not change her grandfather's mind, she lowered her head and reluctantly took out a wooden bowl from a rack. Inside were 3 fist-sized coarse bundles of flour that looked rather dirty. "Thanks for your goodwill, but I have brought some rations myself." Angora courteously refused after a single glance at the black bread that smelled rather sour with some grain shells sticking out of it. Soon, the young girl happily led Angora to the guest room where he would stay. "This room is smaller than the toilet back home." Angora studied his crude room and grumbled quietly after he placed his belongings by the wall after the girl had left. It was fortunate that he was the youngest son and had often been given grief since a child, developing a strong ability to adapt. Soon, he had calmed himself and began to summon the Overlord system once again. It is in the emergency of the bandit ambush that the system was activated last time. "But I can't just get a bandit out of nowhere," Angora muttered, scratching his head. "If I'm not mistaken, there should be some way to open it even during normal circumstances." That being said, Angora was still confused about how he should bring out the system interface. "Open sesame. Hey, come out. Alohomora." He tried every command he remembered from stories as well as every incantation from his own magical knowledge, which he didn't master, but nothing happened. Indeed, if the system panel did not provide the additional service of the Hitman Genie which saved him from being killed by bandits, Angora would have considered that the Overlord system or whatnot was actually his own imagination. There must be something I missed. What could it be? He was stroking his chin by instincts as he pondered heavily. That was when a white ball of light suddenly whooshed out to his blind side. It extended a tentacle that stabbed firmly at his name before disappearing with another whoosh. Angora did not feel its presence at all. Instead, he had a sudden idea as if given a sign by some deity, with the text on that system page flashing past his mind's eye. O Master of Games, grant us new life. He unwittingly muttered the words. Soon, that cool gaming interface appeared before him once more. Success. So that's the command. Angora happily jumped on the bed. It was a habit he had whenever he was delighted. The old mayor's rather broken wooden bed was unable to withstand the impact, however, and collapsed with a crack as it slammed heavily on the floor, bringing Angora with it. He rolled around in pain, clasping the back of his head. My lord, are you all right? Vela, who had not gone to bed yet, asked in concern when she heard the commotion from outside. Even if he was a little hurt, his self-esteem as a noble could not stand by having his own subjects see him in such a pathetic state. Hence, holding back tears and struggling against the pain, he mumbled through his lips, I'm fine. Chapter 17. Farming is best suited for labor and capital as expected. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. When Shi Wei saw what happened with Angora in the Divine Kingdom, he could not help but think that he was being simple-minded in choosing some dolt as a rather important new village head. That being said, even Shi Wei did not expect the little town outside the Valley of the Tragic Dead to be so barren. Looks like I have to think of a way to help. Shi Wei scratched his head with his tentacles as he pondered how he should proceed. The problem at hand was that with the townsfolk suffering from famine, it meant that their respect could be easily earned by thinking of ways to fill their stomachs. He might even secure another wave of followers in the process. If that was so, the Overlord system could slightly relax on strategic combat management, and focus on farming literally. If it's farming, I guess it would be games like Harvest Moon and Rune Factory back in my world. Shi Wei slightly adjusted the setting as per his idea, only to find that he was underpowered in the aspects of plants or harvest. Although he had the ability to modify seeds so that they could instantly mature, the divine energy required to control plants and harvest was considerable. Moreover, that effect would not last up to the next generation, and their seeds would only bear normal harvest. It's quite difficult to yield both quantity and quality at once. There is no combat class in the town either, so there is no way to obtain bone powder or other materials from the fringe reaches of the Valley of the Tragic Dead to help them grow. Shi Wei found the present situation difficult. Moreover, if the balance between intake and output of divine energy cannot be ensured, my divine energy would be used up after a dozen accelerated harvests. And when he thought about it carefully, the farming simulation in both Harvest Moon and Rune Factory did take most of the player's time, given that it was the main aspect of fun for those games. Still, Shi Wei would not want Angora to become a farmer. The fellow was a bit of a dolt, but since he was the new village head whom he had chosen. That was when Shi Wei noticed the useless metal scraps piling in his divine kingdom, and the idea he had days ago, which did not really present itself, finally sprung out. Should he create a currency for his believers, the players of the system? As long as it does not flow out to other markets, the scraps that caught divinity would never catch the attention of the other gods, especially the goddess of prosperity. At the same time, the divinity meant that it would not be counterfeited, eliminating the possibility of fraud. Setting. Divine seeds need to be bought with game currency, and the dolt. Angora could learn some management through games of the genre, supervising and allocating the villagers as farmers. Since the divine seeds wouldn't need watering or fertilizing, I'll just make it so that the allocated personnel must pray to me devotedly in order for the seeds to grow, and would grow even faster the more believers there are, and each plot of land are only allowed to have at most 3 farmers. That would probably recover some divine energy, and the other facilities could use this design as well. I'm a genius. With Angora acting as an example, the townsfolk who were beside themselves with hunger would probably be flocking under his wing. Moreover, Shi Wei did not need all of them to become true believers, as shallow believers would suffice in providing him divine energy. The harvest can also be sold into the system for game currency. Furthermore, even if the preceding generation had been harvested and the new crops lost the capacity for instant growth, it still reduces the divine energy needed to modify them now. Angora could also buy new seeds after trading for the game currency, and I'd give him those seeds. That basically means no problem. In a nutshell, the process in which Shiwei would sell Angora divine seeds, obtain the second-generation crops from Angora and resell them to the dolt as new divine seeds still would extol a cost on divine energy. However, all it took was a shallow believer to keep praying as the seeds go, any loss would hence be reimbursed, and the more believers converted under Angora's wing, the more Shiwei would earn. Additionally, the presence of the game currency limits the number of divine seeds Angora could obtain. Given that Shiwei still had limited divine power, he could not provide him too many seeds at once. Done. Now we'll see how that dolt is going to put on airs. Early next morning, Angora got out of bed and left the house to begin surveying his lands. The land was infertile as the old man told him the day before, and what few usable plots were scorched to ashes. It certainly explained the enmity that the townsfolk aimed at all outsiders, and Angora himself would have been driven away if not for his young age. "My lord, so you're here." Vela found him around noon. She sounded rather upset. "Please don't wander around, we'll be in trouble if something happened to you in this town. Lunch is ready, please leave immediately after your meal." "Lunch? Is that the same black bread as yesterday's?" Angora asked curiously. "I've heated it a bit, and I'm off to pluck some mushrooms with which I could make soup for you." Vela then hesitated, seemingly finding it rude to serve such things to a noble, and whispered, "I'm sorry, but that's the best we can do." Nonetheless, Angora said, "If you don't mind, please keep me company for a while." "Ha! Don't look so miserable," Angora said, slightly miffed. "How about this? You'll keep me company until the sun rises to the center of the skies. If you're not interested, I'll leave today and you wouldn't have to chase me off. How about that?" "I'm just a peasant. I certainly can't go against your wish, my lord," the girl muttered, but still obediently followed Angora to where the farms had been. There was a thick blanket of ash covering the plot of land. Although the soil might be more fertile in the coming year thanks to that, there was just no telling how many townsfolk could last until then. "Is this your family's plot?" Angora asked. "It's that one," the girl pointed at one of the plots by the fringes which appeared irregular. "There are fewer heads in my family, that's why our land is smaller. I'm borrowing it for a bit." "What?" Then, ensuring that the girl was not watching, Angora inwardly thought the words, "Oh Master of Games, give us new life," to open the system page, and flipped through it to get to a new page which appeared yesterday. Overlord System. Penguin Farm version 0.1 test version. Chapter 18. Divine Miracle. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, Overlord System. Penguin Farm version 0.1 test version, Farm. 0 out of 1, Seeds. None, Livestock. Locked, Pen required, Game currency. 0, Hint. Welcome to Penguin Farm. A newcomer gift pack has been delivered to your storage, please collect it from the main page. Although Angora did not quite understand what penguin meant, he had poked around last night and generally understood the subpage function of Penguin Farm. Roughly speaking, it was an agricultural section within the Overlord system. Moreover, the bottom of the page was a shop option which listed an assortment of seeds. Still, there were only a few which had its picture displayed, the icons on the others were pitch black, and it appeared that those could only be unlocked at a later time. There was also a sale window which Angora failed to sell anything with, or he would have sold off even the walls Vela's house. Considering that the sale window was placed in the farmstead page, only harvested crops or livestock could be sold off. Please lock on to farmstead with 1. Unit area as the first farmstead for Penguin Farm. Others aside, What Angora had to do first was choose his farmstead. The system had tipped him that building floors cannot be used as farmstead when he tried to use the function in his room, which was why Angora was having a stroll around the town, looking for a place suitable as his first farmstead. However, after running into Vela, he thought that it was easier to borrow her family's farm instead of developing some new unusual land to work with. In any case, he should try to obtain Vela's grandfather's favor as mayor if he would establish himself in the town. Hence, following instructions from the system and with his consciousness connected, Angora locked the barren farmland belonging to Vela's family as his first farmstead. As the words "lock complete" soon appeared, Angora found the only a square section out of the knot. Quite large farmland was flashing, indicating that the 1 unit area, equals to 1 square meter, was only that large. Unfortunately, just like the system page, only Angora himself could see it. Then, Angora collected the gift pack from his system storage. There were 2 items inside. Spirit oat seed X1 and the watering bucket of the devout. The spirit oat seed was actually from a common plant, it was the watering bucket of the devout which left Angora surprised. It was a watering bucket but one which was crafted very sophisticatedly. Its glaze appeared to be of the highest quality and had a unique elegance to it, and he thought that it would not rust even as he looked at its metallic silver paint and its rose. Its body was also embedded with simple aesthetical carvings that one would be reluctant to part with, and its handle, though also metallic, was closer to yellow copper. Even if it was carved with arts of vines from an unknown plant, it did not impede the grip but instead felt very comfortable to hold. After all, children of the other world have not heard of ergonomics. Where did you get that bucket? Vale had seen Angora's hand reaching over his own back, and was surprised when he took out that exquisite watering bucket out of nowhere. Us nobles would learn magic with the mages before inheriting our own fief. But that's not the point. Angora certainly thought that taking the watering bucket out of nowhere was a blunder as well. It was lucky that the witness was just Vela, and a village girl like her could be easily swindled. And she was indeed conned. Her face had the admiring look of so.all.the.noble.lords.in.the.city.could.do.magic.tricks. He prayed that her bubble would not burst too quickly. Then, as the girl watched, Angora buried the spirit oat seed into the soil. Are you trying to plant it now? It won't work, it's too late, and winter is coming in half a month. It would at most sprout before your plant froze to death. Vela frowned as she tried to discourage him. Winter here is also especially cold. The animals would hibernate and all the trees would go bald as their leaves fall off. You wouldn't even get black bread by then. You should hurry away from this place. If this thing really won't do, I might really leave. Angora shrugged. But now isn't the time to despair. After he had buried the seed, a countdown timer that read 3.59.59 appeared over the locked farmstead in Angora. So, it takes just 4 hours. Angora was slightly relieved. The only problem now was the matter of yield quantity. By the way, since you are aware of the trouble winter brings, why not move away from this place? Angora asked Vela as they went to fetch water for his can. It is quite far, but wouldn't you be free from situations like this once you leave for the city? Grandpa said that he is mayor. If even he was afraid and fled, this town which he inherited from his own ancestors would be finished. Vela smiled bitterly in return. Even if he does not have long to live, he wished to stay with this town he grew up in until the end. What about the nearby churches? Wouldn't they help? Angora asked once the idea struck him, and because various churches were in charge of emergency relief as well. There are no churches across 10 miles, the young girl replied, her expression becoming even more bitter. If anything, even the gods had probably left us to fend for ourselves in this wretched place. Angora quietly filled his bucket with water. He knew very well that if he did nothing, this place which was town in name but no more than a small village would never endure past winter. What townsfolk remaining would be stricken with hunger and cold, and could die from either of those things. For some reason, he then felt that bucket in his hand had become heavier, as if there was something else apart from water in it. Watering bucket of the devout, legendary. Offer your sincere prayer to the God of games when you use this bucket. The strength of your faith would reduce the time needed for your crop to mature. The maximum time reduction rate of this effect is 50%. No, that's not true. Even if the blessings from the other gods are now absent, there is still one who watches over this place. Angora, who had been keeping his non-committal nobility attitude, finally became serious. That's going a little too far, even if it's for solace. The young girl smiled begrudgingly. I'm not too good with words, but I do understand that simple conversation wouldn't work with all of you. So please, take a look. Holding the watering bucket and a devout heart he never had, Angora slowly poured the water over the seed which he just buried. This is what I wanted to show all of you, a divine miracle from my Lord. In the very next moment, a tender sprout poked out of the soil covered in dark ash. Just like a precious jade. Chapter 19. The untimely death of an original believer. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Shi Wei, who was thinking about what he could do next in the Divine Kingdom, suddenly paused. Angora actually converted from shallow believer to devout believer. And it also looks like he amwayed a new devout believer as well. He was at once delighted and muttered, looks like I've picked the right person. It seemed that he had completely forgotten that he had been addressing Angora as dolt. What next was for the plantation area to be surface, and for the crops to be harvested and gain favor of the townsfolk. Angora certainly would not mess up something so simple. Moreover, with the limits placed upon land and pricing, Shi Wei would not have to worry that Angora would overdevelop immediately and catch the attention of the god of harvest. He had predicted that the present state would last 2 or 3 years, and everything would be too late when the other deity finally realized that something was unusual. Shi Wei was confident about himself, being a true transmigrant and having the Midas's touch as the god of games. He would be ashamed if he could not stand up against some average local god after 2 or 3 years. And the most important problem now is still the players. Given that Shi Wei's divine order level was limited, the maximum level of the combat class players was a paltry 30 and could not be transferred. While the players led by Elena were still engrossed in leveling up and could not tell, most of the players would be upset when they start to feel shackled after they reach that level limit. There were actually simple solutions to those problems, however. One was to strengthen the efforts of recruiting believers and accumulate more divine energy with which he could elevate his divinity grade, which in turn naturally extends the power of his divine order and raise the maximum level of the players. The second was to destroy every other god and directly steal their divinity, the power within of which he would fuse to his own divinity. If the first option was pompous, the second option was undoubtedly evil. After all, Shi Wei would not dare to conspicuously intrude the territory of the other gods for his believer recruitment, and such a cagey form of conversion was simply too slow. Heaven knows when he would finally gather divine energy to ascend his divinity level. Moreover, the stealing of other divinities was not without precedent. Stoff, the present god of craftsmanship and fine wine, had been an ordinary divine being of the ironworks aspect. However, he triumphed over the former god of fine wine in divine battle, plundering the other's power and hence become the intermediate god he was now. That said, it's not easy to look for a hostile god whom I could do in. Shi Wei's spherical body wiggled worriedly. The gods themselves have no hierarchy. Save for the Trinity of creation and the 7 heavenly fathers who were currently acknowledged as the strongest, there were, the lines separating greater gods, intermediate gods, and lesser gods were actually blurred. They were all merely ambiguously categorized according to the strengths or weaknesses of their divine order, as well as their performance in divine battle. Being the newly ascended god of games who was so recently born, he could not join the war between the gods. What was worse was his divinity being damaged, that he probably would not even be considered a lesser god. If he must put a finger on it, he probably would be ranked as a puny god that was a class beneath lesser gods. And it would be difficult to find another puny god with whom he could trade punches as a newbie. My balls hurt. Although I don't have any at the moment. Shi Wei extended a tentacle to scratch what was supposedly his forehead, and suddenly realized that something was wrong. Unlike the gods whose believers numbered up to millions, given that all of Shi Wei's believers added up barely made it past double digits, he was therefore aware of each string of faith directed to him. Just now, a vein of divine energy had vanished. The believer did not appear to belong to Alina's party or Angora's fief, but a believer of the god of games before Shi Wei transmigrated. According to the memories he inherited, the last god of games was probably some unreliable entity with a gambling problem. Shi Wei himself did not expect that their faith lasted until now. That feeling. It doesn't feel like they are being converted. It was impossible for a true believer and those above to be converted to another faith at the drop of a hat, since one would not become a true believer without firm conviction in their first deity. If it had been conversion, their faith would instead slowly decay, and eventually disappear amidst its weakest moments. There was only a single explanation for a sudden severance such as just now. That believer had died. And because those original believers did not possess the system, they could not be resurrected like Alina and the others. It would have been fine if the believer died a natural death or in their sleep. However, if it was an accident or murder, that person's psyche intensity would rocket unthinkably in the instant they faced impending death, and was likely the peak level of their life. Perhaps that was the precise reason that Shi Wei noticed that there was a path connecting him to the emotions of the follower before he died, leaving their final divine energy in his divine kingdom in what appeared to be clump of silver fog at a single glance. Shi Wei hesitated for a moment, but finally reached out with his tentacles to touch it. It was sheer terror, a heart full of grief and regrets, along with a mingled scent of hate that the god they trusted did not aid them in their last moments. The follower did not die in accident. He was murdered, even possibly tortured beforehand. Shi Wei was silent, unsure of what he should be thinking. He once believed that his predecessor, the original god of games, and his believers had nothing to do with himself since they were not his subjects. Moreover, with his predecessor's horrific reputation, those believers would have jumped ship at any moment. But now he realized he was wrong. Both himself and his predecessor were unquestionably the god of games, and his predecessor's believers were his too. People who held faith and entrusted everything upon him. Although he might not necessarily be indiscriminate with all followers, should he have no reaction and watch as his followers were murdered, how was he different from the other cold-blooded deities of this world? As I thought, I really want to be a nice god. At that moment, another vein of divine energy abruptly vanished. The massacre of his predecessor's believers was continuing. God damn. That's really looking down on me, the god of games. Having made his choice, Shi Wei felt his entire body relax. Don't panic, believers, your god is coming. Chapter 20. Princess of the Fallen Kingdom. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Nonetheless, Shi Wei was not so reckless that he would ignore all else to directly descend and blow up every foe for his believers. Therefore, he would do what he always did. Use his divine eye to find the original believers who were in trouble and understand their situation within the shortest period of time. He then found out that the believers were not quite gambling addicts. Although they appeared ragged, were equipped with armor and weapons that were poorly maintained, their every movement along with the emblems on their broken equipment made it clear that they all served a common group. As he cross-referenced the remaining records in his divinity, Shi Wei promptly realized that those believers were more troublesome than he imagined. They were the original founders of the Church of the God of Games, survivors of Tierra, the Fallen Kingdom. It was an overgrown forest full of towering trees and dense shrubs where usually not a single soul could be seen. Tree crowns filled the forest canopy and blocked out the sky, leaving the forest in dimness, if it was not for the occasional ray of sunshine piercing through the canopy to project faint strips radiance within the forest, one would have trouble differentiating between night and day. The young girl who was dressed in combat gear was running through a narrow path between the woods. Her blonde ponytail danced as she moved, shining with a golden hue brighter than the sun itself. There were still a few elites keeping guard around her, who were probably her guards. Suddenly, the young girl tripped over a tree root and almost fell, but was caught by the outstretched hand of the oldest guardsman beside her. "Thank you, Uncle Carlo." The girl who was panting heavily and sweating buckets from running conveyed her gratitude. "It is my duty, Your Highness." The man appeared much more at ease, but he spoke stiffly and seriously. "We are now some distance away from Lancaster City, and they would have trouble tracking us in this forest. Let's rest for a moment." In response, the girl did not keep up her brave act, leaning on a tree and sitting on it without any cushioning, with a face full of grief. "I thought by setting base in Lancaster, we would at least be free from the sabotages by the traitor king's army. I simply did not imagine that someone from an evil god cult appearing out of nowhere would corner us like this." "Because the god of games has left us," the middle-aged man said flatly. "That's disrespectful, Uncle Carlo." The young girl smiled bitterly, but her words appeared to be more mocking of herself than blaming him. In reality, even if they, refugees of Tierra, maintained their traditional belief in the god of games, almost everyone was aware that the deity had left them. It made sense if they thought about it. The great kingdom of Tierra, which had been at the height of its power when they were invaded and driven to its knees, and yet that god had never once displayed even the slightest of providence. With what few were left of them now, it certainly was impossible for them to gain any divine compassion. Nonetheless, the young girl who had long since gotten used to cruel blows shook her head, throwing aside her doubt towards the god of games. More importantly, why would anyone from an evil god cult know our hidden base in Lancaster? Not even the inquisitors of the traitor king has found us. "I can answer that, Lady Leah." A sharp voice with unrepressed hostility suddenly spoke, setting the girl's party on alert at once. Soon, however, their alertness turned into profound despair, for many figures dressed in black cloaks and wearing bizarre black and white masks appeared from the dense forest. The girl was only too familiar with them. Their secret base in Lancaster had been overrun by those same cultists. At the moment, she was completely surrounded by the cultists. The one who spoke was probably their leader, who had just slowly stepped out from their formation. He lifted his right hand, and his cloak slipped off to expose his scar-laden right hand. An insect resembling an overgrown purple fly was resting on his right index finger, and using its front legs to rub its massive compound eyes. This black corpse fly is not useful in fighting as a magical pet, but as a familiar it can precisely identify the rotting odor lingering on every Rotten Bones follower, the cultist said proudly. "It's all too easy to track all of you with it." Before the girl could retort, the guard beside her cried out in agony. She turned in panic, and found the stoic middle-aged man Carlo had cut down one of the guards. "Stop! What are you doing, Uncle Carlo?" the young girl exclaimed in surprise. "Don't you get it? The black corpse fly was tracking your Captain Carlo's scent." The cultist leader laughed dementedly. "That Uncle Carlo you respect so much was on our side in the first place. He has become a follower of Rotten Bones." "How could this be?" The girl was in disbelief. "I am sorry, Your Highness." Carlo remained as stoic as ever and showed no apologetic expression whatsoever. "You know very well that my wife and daughter died in the defense of Tierra. I could never forget the terrible state of their lifeless bodies, and in every moment of the last few years, my heart burns with vengeance. Even so, after fighting in the war, I now know for sure of the gap between an army blessed by a god and another which was abandoned. That feeble god of games is unable to help me exact vengeance, and as such, I sold my soul to a god who can actually help me claim revenge. So, in the end, I'm just a ladder you climb on the path of vengeance." The girl's body was quivering. She felt as if she had fallen into an icy cavern after being betrayed by the one person whom she trusted the most. An initiation, to be precise. Meanwhile, we're going to properly educate you before presenting you as a gift to some noble in the empire, Princess of Tierra. I'm convinced that we could get something really nice from those pigs with that very title. The cultist leader interjected. They especially like such things. I won't let you. The girl bit her lip and unsheathed her saber. The other guards followed suit and brought their weapons to bear at the cultists and the traitorous captain of the guard surrounding them. The other ladies all say that, and all of them ended up as our tributes. It's perfectly fine, we have people with special skills designed for that amongst our group. The leader of the cultist was not concerned despite the young girl's weapon, but was instead becoming thrilled. It won't take a while before you'll be as docile as they were. I'm very sorry, Carlo said dryly, before pointing his sword at the girl. You will face divine retribution for turning against God, the young girl said, slightly trembling as she tried to maintain her courage. Maybe. Like you, I once held immeasurable faith in that god of games, but he never helped his grace in the fall of Tierra, nor did he help me when my wife and daughter were killed by soldiers serving the traitor king, Carlo said coldly. That is why now, in this very moment, he would not help you either, your grace. Because that god is so cold-blooded and heartless.